am thrilled today to get to introduce Miss Ava Brady. But before I do that, I want to mention that if you have need closed captioning, you can do that. So you just go to the bottom of your screen and you'll see where it says CC live transcript. You just need to click that button and that will help you read along. So again, this is a program every other week, Luncheon with the League. So thankful for Cynthia and Michael for making this possible. But today I get to introduce Ava Brady, who is a senior at Bishop Watterson here in Columbus. She's right now applying for colleges. She's been an intern for over a year. You should know that I've known Ava since before she was born because she lived across the street from me when she and her twin sister Sinead were born. She is getting ready to study political science and public policy. She wants to run for office someday. And I must tell you that if we get more young leaders like Ava, we are in great shape. It is just such an honor to introduce Ava, who will be the moderator today.
Oh, well, thank you. Once again, my name is Ava. My pronouns are she, her, and I can't outdo Jen, so we'll hop right into it. I have the honor to introduce Representative Bridget Kelly of House District 31 in Cincinnati, Ohio. This is her third term in the Ohio House. Currently, she is serving on Finance Committee, Finance Transportation Subcommittee, Government Oversight, and State and Local Government, where she is the ranking minority member. Without further ado, please welcome Bridget Kelly.
Thank you so much, Ava, for such a kind introduction. I hope you will keep me in mind in all of your future endeavors, because we love to find as many smart, talented folks to run for office as possible. And thank you so much to the League for having me on today. Again, my name is Bridget Kelly. I represent the 31st House District down in Cincinnati. And of course, I love the title of this program, Lunching with the League, because some of my State House colleagues and I actually do a lunch program as well called Lunch with Your Legislators. So I think great minds think alike. I'm presently serving my third term in the Ohio House. Time flies when you're having fun, I guess. And I am privileged to serve on the Finance Committee, Finance Subcommittee for Transportation, on the Committee for Government Oversight, as well as the State and Local Government Committee, which in previous General Assemblies has heard lots of bills related to voting. Before I came to the State House, I worked full-time for the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, which is a labor union that represents mostly grocery, food packing, and processing workers. And so that work centered around ensuring that folks had good wages, affordable benefits, retirement security that they've earned and deserved. And that's a lot of the work that we continue to do at the State House and is at the center of a lot of the policy that we work on. I was privileged to grow up in Norwood, Ohio, where I did serve one term on Norwood City Council. And it's interesting because my whole family is actually from Norwood on both sides. And I've always been really close to my grandmother, my mom's mom. And while she was still alive, she gave me sort of like a memory book, and it was a place for her to, share stories about herself that maybe I didn't know, or to talk about things that were important to her. And in the front cover of it were the three most important things to her. So 3 spaces, and those things were God, family, and the Democratic Party. And I say that because I think that is very emblematic of the approach that I've taken both in my professional career as well as in my time when I've been fortunate enough to be in public service. Those are 3 things that I have kept really close to my heart, because I've spent my entire career, whether in working for the union or working for my constituents, in helping people to have a better life and creating more opportunity for everyone in our community. And I'm so grateful for the chance to do so. Like I said, I grew up in Norwood. I attended college at Xavier University, where I got a business degree, then went on to the University of Cincinnati, which we have to always remind people that is the University of Cincinnati. Maybe we spend a little time in Columbus with that other school up there. And got a master's degree in human resources. But after I got out of undergraduate, I decided that I was going to run for council in Norwood. And it was before any of the technology really existed in a meaningful way. And so we didn't have, a tool to cut lists or figure out who was likely to vote for us. We certainly, didn't have a budget that was going to help us, reach people. And so the way that we did it was really more of a boots on the ground approach, and talk to as many people as we could. And the reason why that was so important, and I think helped us to start out in a really good place, is because the best way to know what's important to people is to ask them, because they'll tell you what matters to them, what matters to their family. And that is really something that I have carried with me. My dad served in local political office for a long time. And I used to go out with him when he would go talk to people. And it was a really important lesson for me, and something that I think is really valuable. And one of the best things about being able to serve in this role is being able to talk to people about really important, sometimes really complicated, really emotional topics that deeply impact them and their families, and having folks be willing to share those parts of their lives, because that is a gift, to be able to meet with people and connect with them and have those deep conversations about how their government is or isn't working for them, and how we can do better by them, because we can always do better. So I was first elected to the State House in 2016, went through a 6-way primary, which was a very interesting experience, and definitely learned a lot through that process, and then was reelected in 2018 as well as in 2020. Since I've been in the State House, I've had the good fortune to serve on a myriad of committees, but in the last General Assembly, also served on the Committee for State and Local Government. We actually had the most bills assigned to us of any committee in the entire State House the last time through. And we cover a very broad swath of issues, which has been really interesting. I definitely want to say thank you very much to the folks at the League, who have continued to be a great resource for us when we are talking about specifically about voting issues. We had a few very challenging pieces of legislation come through in the last General Assembly. And like anything else, the best way to make good policy is to talk to the experts and talk about the impact that our legislation is going to have on folks every day. Talking to people about things like this, some folks, view it as arduous or as problematic. But at the end of the day, we should know, to the greatest extent that we can, what the laws we're passing are going to do in practicality, because while some things might sound good in theory, in practice, it can make things really, really difficult for folks, or there might be a better way, or when you talk to people who are engaged in very specific positions, they can shed light on, things that are good and things that are bad, and help us find ways to improve those. And so one of the things that's always been important to me in public service is being able to be accessible to the folks that I represent, to the advocates who are interested in talking about what's going on, and being responsive to concerns. We meet with folks. Sometimes we agree with them, sometimes we don't. We sometimes think we have great ideas that then turn out not to be so great. We sometimes have good ideas that other people help us make better. But it's really that collaborative process and that ability to be open and transparent that has really helped us, I think, in the State House. A few of the important things that we've worked on. Last General Assembly was probably one of my proudest achievements, when we were able to axe the tax on period products to make things like pads, tampons, and cups exempt from the state sales tax, because those are things that we know people who menstruate need to go to work, to go to school, to participate in their community. And especially for people who are on a very fixed budget or are struggling to get by, that can be a barrier for them. And so if we are really trying to create more opportunity to lift people up, then this was a small thing that could have a big impact. So we were really, really proud that we were able to join the states who do not charge a sales tax on period products. In this General Assembly, a couple things that we are working on are raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. This is the third time that we've introduced such legislation, although it's changed, a little bit through that process of talking to advocates and talking to opponents and figuring out what's good or bad or what could be improved. This time, we are following the model that was passed in the state of Florida. So it would raise the minimum wage to $10 an hour in January of 2022. And then the minimum wage would increase $1 an hour until it gets $15 an hour in 2027, and then would be attached to inflation. That is a bill that I'm working on with Representative Dontavius Geralds from the Columbus area, and Senator Cecil Thomas and Herschel Craig have companion legislation in the Senate. Another thing that we're working on is ensuring that folks have access to their pay stubs. So we know that employers in the state of Ohio are keeping track of things like pay and deductions and other things of that nature. And we think that folks who work hard every day should be able to have access to their pay statements. We're one of only 9 states, actually, where employers do not have to provide employees with copies of their pay statements or access to it. So this is a bipartisan effort that we are reintroducing because we think it is very common sense, and it can make a big transformative impact on people in our state, particularly, folks that are trying to do the right thing and pay their taxes, people who need to get a place to live, so an apartment application, people who need to get a car so that they can go to work. And these can be barriers. Not having your pay statements can be barriers to all of these. And so again, it's a small thing that is very impactful and can make a big difference in people's lives. So we are hoping that will see through. And we are also continuing to work on legalizing sports betting. And so every time I talk about this, people are like, what does that have to do with all the things that you've talked about in terms of creating more opportunity and economic justice and helping people to build a better life? And I will tell you, the reason is because sports betting is an opportunity to raise resources to reinvest in the kids in our state. And so in the previous iteration of this bill and in a forthcoming piece of legislation, the resources that will be available from sports betting will be reinvested in the kids in the state of Ohio. And so when I talk to the folks in my district, overall, they tell me that 3 things are really important to them. 1 is creating more opportunity for a better life. 2 is having good public schools to be able to send their kids. And 3 is having safe, healthy neighborhoods that they can be proud of. And so again, that is really where we keep, the center of our work. And I'm so grateful to serve my community and to serve the people in the state of Ohio and to have the opportunity to represent the 31st House District. Again, I really appreciate the invitation to be here today. And I'm so grateful for all of the work that the League does for people all over this state.
Thank you. That was wonderful. We are now going to move into our Q&A portion of the luncheon. Our first question of the day is, The League of Women Voters is most interested in voting rights issues. How can Ohio improve the way we vote? What are your impressions of how voting in Ohio went in the most recent election?
Thank you. So I'd say fundamentally, sort of at the crux of it, Ava, is that we should be making voting easier, not harder. And we should be creative and innovative in the ways that we do it. I've heard from my colleagues that, you know, we need to find more ways to make voting safe and secure so that, you know, only folks who, you know, are qualified to vote can do so. But again, I'd say then we need to make it easier for people to be able to register to vote in order so that people can see, hey, all their ducks are in a row, all their I's are dotted, all their T's are crossed. A couple common sense ways to do that would be to, one, make voting a little bit easier for people in terms of the absentee process, because we know a lot of people are working hard. We know a lot of people are working, you know, schedules that aren't 9 to 5 anymore. And so with the schedule we have set up right now, it can make it difficult for somebody to go down to their local board of elections during sort of bankers' hours in order to cast their ballot. We saw, you know, boards of elections who were totally overwhelmed. And, you know, COVID is an exceptional time, but I think exceptional times often give ways to great ideas that can make things easier, pandemic or not. So the ability for people to apply for absentee ballots online. You know, a lot of people carry around their phone, and that would be something that it would be really easy to apply for their absentee ballot online. To have more than one place where you can vote early. You know, counties are big, and some counties have more people than others. I mean, right down here in Hamilton County, you know, I'm pleased that the Board of Elections is located in my district, but it can be difficult sometimes for folks to come all the way from the west side of Hamilton County, or maybe from the northeast side of Hamilton County. And so it might make sense for folks to have more options to vote there. More than one drop box for absentee ballots, you know, knowing that people are coming from, you know, all around counties, especially in some of the, you know, rural areas where you might have to go from one end of the county to another on a road that's not a highway. You know, I think to make it more convenient and easier to people is really important. We need to take down barriers. I think that we really need to take a thoughtful look at eliminating the purge, because it can have a lot of unintended consequences. With that, I will say, you know, that the secretary did publish the list, which is a step in the right direction in terms of transparency. But I think we really need to be thoughtful about that process and whether it is actually necessary in terms of being able to keep our elections secure and accessible to people.
Thank you. I do have a follow-up to that question. With reapportionment affecting legislative and congressional maps this year, how can we best end up with maps that are more fair and less gerrymandered? And how does that affect our voting processes in Ohio?
So fair maps are incredibly important. And I think that sometimes we're seeing the impact of maps that are not necessarily fair, and districts where elected officials pick the people that vote for them instead of the other way around. And that's a huge problem. And I think it also contributes to some of the challenges that we're seeing in the legislature, where, you know, you've got folks who are working more from far left or far right instead of finding ways to meet in the middle. I'm somebody who is very big on fight when you need to and work together when you can. And I think fair maps is something that we can and should be working together on, because it will help us to better represent all of the people in our state. And so part of the new process is creating more avenues for public input about these districts. And so I would definitely encourage your members, when the opportunity arises, and hopefully there will be a robust opportunity for public input. And if there's not, then I think part of what everybody should consider is demanding that there is an accessible opportunity for a lot of conversation about this. You know, these the map drawing process is something that should take place in the light of day with a lot of input in order to get the best outcome for the greatest number of people, to do the most amount of good for the people who live in this state. So I'd say that should be one. When the lines come out, pay attention, talk about why it makes sense, why it doesn't make sense. You know, the whole idea behind the new process is to make sure that like communities are kept together as much as possible, that we're not drawing all of these crazy borders, so that people can be better represented. And at the end of the day, it is our job to represent our constituents. And so I would say to definitely stay engaged. The process is going to move quickly because the census data is late. And I've heard from some of the legislative leaders that, you know, that's going to delay things. Whether or not it necessarily needs to is probably another issue that could be discussed at a whole separate luncheon with the league. But it will move quickly. And so I would say to pay careful attention to that. And we will, of course, be glad to be a resource for people to the extent that we're able.
Okay, and that was great. Moving into more of legislative area, what are your priorities this year for the state budget?
So the state budget is a reflection of priorities. And so I think when we see where folks would like their resources to go, it's a reflection of what matters to them. And so for me, it's always important for the state budget to be about doing the most amount of good for the greatest number of people. And we know that over the last 2 years, it's been a really difficult and challenging time, mostly because of COVID. And, you know, it's something nobody could have ever expected. It's something that was very resource intensive for a lot of state departments. And it has definitely exposed a lot of inequities that we already knew existed. And it has exacerbated them in ways. And so for me, it is about ensuring that we look at how do we invest in the people of Ohio to put all of us in the best position to succeed. You know, I think for me, there might be a little more, if we invest in business, then it will help everyone else to succeed. And I think a lot of times that hasn't necessarily been the case. You know, if we have seen that JFS isn't able to meet the extraordinary needs that have existed before, and certainly don't now, then maybe we need to take a look at providing additional resources for that, because they were already operating with a system that wasn't necessarily sufficient for a previous need, and then you toss in a pandemic, and there was no way that they were going to be able to meet that need in the way that they wanted to. We, I think, have a bad habit of expecting people to make transformational change without the resources to do so. And so for me, I'd like to be a little more cognizant of the fact that if we're going to expect significant improvements in outcomes, that we need to invest in those and to be mindful about that. So presently, I also serve on the transportation subcommittee for the finance department. And so one of the other things, you know, that we are trying to be really mindful of, and I actually just saw a question in the chat come up about this, but about investing in public transportation so that Ohioans have the ability to get to work and to get to different opportunities in their communities. Because, you know, one thing that COVID has, you know, really exposed for everybody is that there are so many systems that are not working the way that they should for the people in this state. And there are a lot of systems that are failing people in a way that is not equitable at all. So there are certain groups of people who are being failed by systems more than others. So I think when we look at all of this, we have to look at it in a way of, okay, how can we ensure that the folks who are most impacted are receiving the resources that they need in order to better level the playing field? And how can we expect people to be able to, survive in a pandemic if we are not willing to give them the resources that they need in order to help themselves to have a better life. So if you can't get to a job, that's a problem. If you can only get yourself to a job that's going to pay you a poverty wage, that's a problem. If you are trying to do everything right and get your unemployment, but the system doesn't work because we've been underinvesting in it, that's a problem. And so I'm hopeful that, throughout the process that we can come up with some good solutions for all of these issues.
Thank you. Moving back to something you said earlier about raising the minimum wage, how can you guarantee that raising the minimum wage will keep jobs in Ohio, with businesses already struggling with COVID, as you just mentioned? How do you propose a solution to this concern that countless Ohioans are having?
No, I appreciate that question. And this is something that we've been talking about ever since we introduced a bill to raise the minimum wage to $15 the very first time is, how are we sure that this is going to help lift people up instead of keep people down? And so I will say a few things. In this iteration, it is the longest ramp to $15 that we have ever introduced. In the first iteration, it was 15 by 2025, second by 2023. This one is by 2027. And so that will give businesses time to plan. That was something that we'd heard as feedback in the last one. And again, that's where this collaborative process of hearing people who agree with you and people who don't is really important to improving policy. But we also know that if folks can't make ends meet, they're not shopping at a local coffee shop. They're not putting anything extra in their grocery cart. They're not going to visit, one of the specialty stores that's on a street corner in so many communities all around this state because they don't have the money to do it. We hear from people a lot that folks just need to work harder. Folks just need to work harder. People are working really hard, but they still can't make ends meet, and I think along with the minimum wage, there are a lot of other things that we might consider in order to help people. On-call scheduling makes it difficult for people to have two jobs. Signing non-compete makes it more difficult for people to have two jobs. But you have to have two jobs if you can't make ends meet on one job. And so I know some of the information that has come out at the federal level talking about the impact of $15 minimum wage says, we're going to lose, I think it's about a million jobs nationwide. But the question is, how many of those jobs are second jobs to people who are forced to hold multiple jobs? How many of those jobs are third jobs? We're seeing lots of companies make technological improvements for the sake of efficiency and everything else. And so people are like, that's just going to speed it up. That's already happening. Prices are already going up. Wages are not going up. Productivity has gone up. Wages have not. And so it's really important to us, just, if you are working full time, you should not have to live in poverty. And when folks are better able to take care of themselves and others, it's good for them. It's good for their families. It's good for the communities. It's good for the small businesses, and it's good for everybody in our state.
Okay, and moving on to a question the league is getting quite frequently. Do you have any updates about House Bill 55 and 56, especially concerning possible virtual testimony?
So we were really proud to introduce House Bill 55 and House Bill 56 for virtual testimony, as well as a mask requirement at the State House. It's more important than ever that we have as much input from the folks who live in our state as possible. These are really tough times. We should know exactly how people are feeling about the work that we're doing. But if folks don't have to wear a mask when they come into the State House, like they do in every other place of business in the state, then we are not making government accessible. If we are forcing people to choose between their health and well-being and participating in their government, we are not keeping business open. We're not keeping government open for people in our state. And so these are two things that could contribute to helping us to be more transparent, more accountable, and ensuring access to the people's government, to the people that we represent. I also think that, if folks are unwilling to put forward a mask requirement for being in the State House, then we should give people the option for virtual testimony. If folks are hesitant about providing people an avenue for virtual testimony, then we should require everyone in the State House to wear a mask, because we can say as much as we want that the People's House is open for business, but if we're putting people at risk to come there, or it precludes people from coming in, then we're really not open for business. So both of these bills had a sponsor hearing about 2 weeks ago. They've both been assigned to the Committee on Government Oversight. We are hopeful that we will have another opportunity for people to provide testimony about why these bills are important. I'll say in the previous General Assembly, I served on the Finance Committee for Health and Human Services. And a lot of the people that came through to talk about the different parts of the budget and the things that were going to impact them and their families were self-advocates. These are people who have extraordinary physical challenges, have extremely challenging mental health issues, but want to come in and talk about how what we are doing is impacting them and their family. We had somebody come in and testify from a hospital bed. And that's the kind of thing that we should have. That is the kind of thing that we should have in these hearings. But we are not providing people a way to do that when we say, hey, we know and understand and acknowledge that you are already immunocompromised. So at a time when we are trying to avoid large public gatherings everywhere else, we'd like for you to come to a large public gathering in the State House where, by the way, not everyone is necessarily going to be wearing a mask. I think that is just a total disservice to the people that we represent. So for that, I would say, contact your representative, tell them it's important. I know there is a petition online that I would be glad to share that link with you, Ava, if that's something that your members might be interested in participating in. I know that you all have been part of a coalition that has been pushing for this, because you know better than anybody that accessible government is better for everyone.
I couldn't agree. Government needs to be a place where people come together. I couldn't agree more. I have another question regarding reapportionment and redistricting. Could you please clarify the effects of delayed release of the decennial data and passing of the constitutional deadline? And how does that impact state legislature and US Congress redistricting? Woo.
That is a mouthful, and I will do my best to answer this to the best of my ability. But the way that the lines are going to be drawn is partially reliant on census data. So if we're going to draw lines that are fair, then we've got to know who's living in the areas for which we are drawing the lines. So if we don't know where we're starting, then we are not necessarily sure where we are going to go, because we want to have a clear picture of who lives where, so that then we can better determine, are these lines fair or not? Are we, keeping communities of interest together or not? So that's where the census data is important. And so the longer it takes us to get that, then the longer it takes us to start getting to work. Now, we can do some sort of foundational stuff. It's kind of like going to the grocery store. If you've got a good grip on, what meals you're having for the week or stuff you always need, then you can start making your list. And then when you make a few more particular decisions, then you can add on the things that you need for particular items. So if we have a pretty good sense of what was there previously, in places where there haven't been a ton of population changes and things like that, we can start doing some background research and figuring out how things are going to work. But, a lot of folks are like, oh no, we got to wait for the census to come back so we can know exactly what's going on. And so I think that could be a big mistake, because drawing lines is a huge responsibility. It's something that's really important, and it's something that could impact us for 10 years. There is a possibility that we could go to 4-year lines, but again, that is a longer conversation for all of redistricting. But I think there are things that we can and should be doing now, but might be delaying until we get that census data back. And we should have as much time as possible, specifically for the public input part of the redistricting process, because that is something that people fought really hard for, and something that I think is going to be a really important piece of the puzzle in terms of drawing these new lines in our state.
Great, thank you. I have a question here that I really like. What is the chance that House Bill 1 will be passed, assuring better funding for public schools?
That I am bullish and cautiously optimistic on it, because we've got to do it. I mean, we've known school funding has been unconstitutional for decades, and we've always kicked the can down the road and said, hey, that's somebody else's responsibility to fix that. And to their credit, former Representative John Patterson and our current Speaker of the House, Bob Cupp, got together and said, hey, we want to get some bright minds together and figure out what does it actually cost to educate a child, and how can we remedy this issue of school funding? Because it shouldn't matter where you grow up. You should have access to a high quality public education, no matter where you live, no matter what race you are, no matter how much money your parents make. That is something that every child in the state of Ohio should have access to. And so they did a ton of work even prior to last General Assembly, when this piece of legislation was initially introduced. It passed out of the House, and then the Senate had a few issues around it. And so hopefully, knowing that those issues existed previously, and knowing that that bill had passed out of the House, there will be enough time to revisit that, figure out what looks good, figure out what might need to be revisited, because we can't keep saying, hey, we know this is a problem, we'll fix it eventually. We have got to take serious action, because we know what we're doing isn't working, and we're not doing right by the kids in our state. So I am cautiously optimistic.
Great. I have a question about the funding for education programs of children through sports betting. And there have been two concerns raised in Q&A. One, that it is antithetical to the values of our education system to raise money through sports betting. And two, keeping in mind that Michigan used lottery money for education, then cut the budget. How can sports betting affect budget cuts from the general education funding in our state? And how will that be beneficial for Ohio children?
Thanks for the questions. If I wrote them down, but if I miss any part of this, Ava, give me a reminder. So a couple things on sports betting. One, we know that Ohioans are betting on sports right now, but they are doing it in a way that is not necessarily safe for consumers. And they're also doing it in a way that does not reap any benefits to our state. If people are choosing to bet on sports in a legal way, they are going to Indiana or Pennsylvania or Michigan and spending their money there. So we want people who are going to engage in sports betting to, one, do it legally, and to two, do it within our own state. Now, in terms of being antithetical to raise money on sports betting, we know this is happening already, and we know that this is a way that we can raise revenue for the kids in our state. So previously, there were, two versions of the sports betting bill in the 133rd General Assembly, but the previous sponsors, Senator O'Brien, Senator Eklund, Representative Greenspan, and myself had worked together in order to try to come up with a good compromise solution that could have been passed in the previous General Assembly, so that we could get those resources to our kids sooner rather than later, because we know that we are missing out. And so that's something that's really important. ultimately where that legislation landed, the money would be invested in extracurricular activities for kids, which are, the first things on the chopping block. So whether it's sports or dance or art or debate, the money would be allocated that through a fund that would give a set amount of money to each school district, and then economically disadvantaged school districts would get more resources. Just trying to take a more equitable approach to it, and knowing that those kids deserve access to the same kinds of programs that kids in wealthier school districts do. With the question about cutting the funds and moving things around, we have been clear since the beginning. The previous sponsors, and I'd imagine whomever the future sponsors are in the Senate, or I would hope, I should say, that this is not meant to replace any existing resources in terms of education or anything else. This is meant to be additive. We know what we have right now isn't sufficient, which is part of our challenge with the school funding formula, because we know it's going to be expensive to do right for our kids, but it's one of the things that's set out as the duty of us to do. And the Constitution is to educate our kids. And so we have been clear in everything that we have said and everything that we have written, is this is meant to be additive, not meant to be a supplement. But again, we want to make sure that people who want to engage in sports betting can do it in a way that protects consumers, that is legal, and that benefits the folks in the state of Ohio. And again, I will say too, in a previous iteration of this bill, it actually provided more money for gambling addiction services. And so we were able to work with the advocates on that to improve that provision of the bill.
Great. I have another question surrounding the Ohio Legislature, in particular, how Ohio has had one major corruption scandal after another in the past several years, which is very unfortunate. What can the Ohio Legislature do to reduce the influence of money in politics?
That is a good question, and something I think that has been really frustrating to many of us for a couple reasons. One, when folks see all of this happening in their state, it doesn't help for us to build trust in government, and it doesn't help people feel like we are doing right by them every day in the legislature. So that's a problem. I also think it deters good people from wanting to run for political office and to serve as advocates and in policy positions, because folks are like, what do you guys have going on there? Are you doing anything good? And we all get painted with this very broad brush, which is not a good thing for anybody, because there are a lot of people who truly want to and are doing good work on behalf and really representing their constituents. But the problem of money in politics is a big one. And the problem of transparency in money in politics is an even bigger one. Representative Miranda and Representative Manning had a bill that they introduced in the previous General Assembly, and I believe will be reintroducing, to create more transparency and to make changes to rules around dark money, where people can funnel money to different places and nobody is the wiser. I think for me, throughout government, transparency should be queen, because it is good on the political side, it is good on the official side. And if you aren't willing to, be transparent about what you're doing and who you're working with, then I think that can also create a lot of other challenges along the way. And so getting dark money out of politics, I think, is an important first step to that. And I know that Rep. Miranda and Rep. Manning's legislation was something that they'd been working on with the secretary. And so hopefully that will be something that again sees the light of day in this GA.
Yeah, I mean, transparency is something we at the League absolutely adore. So it's great to hear all about that. I would like to wrap up on a note of optimism, I hope. But who are your role models in politics, and who are you inspired by now?
Oh, thank you so much for that question. I want to again just say thank you so much to the league for having us. And Ava, thank you so much for doing such a fabulous job as a moderator. Some of your questions were very tough, but I appreciate them nevertheless. I would say one thing that has always really inspired me about public service is just the ability to do good. In my job at the union, I saw people who were willing to risk literally their entire livelihood to create a better circumstance for themselves and their family, higher pay, better benefits, retirement security, a safer place to work. They were willing to go toe to toe with the people who signed their paycheck to organize their coworkers and to fight for a better life. And oftentimes, these were people who, didn't have a lot of means, had a lot of challenges inside and outside of the workplace. And it always was a good reminder, one, that I'm very fortunate and blessed, but also that you've got to have people who are willing to fight like hell for things that are important in order to make real, true, transformational change. And, I still work for UFCW, and it's one of the greatest privileges of my life, because our members work hard every day to serve people in communities throughout the state, throughout this country, to make sure that people have dinner on the table, often through really, really tough circumstances. And especially during COVID, they were always there trying to stock the shelves, make sure the meat cases were full. And I can't say enough about the folks that I have met along the way who are willing to stand up and fight for the things that they needed and their coworkers needed. In terms of people who have influenced me in politics, I think that's a really interesting question, because I think that I love people that have really big transformative ideas. And I think that's really exciting. But I also think it's interesting to take a look at people who are more engaged in trying to find incremental change. But I would say that one of the biggest influences on me and has actually been my mom. My mom works hard every single day. I've always said that she was the biggest politician in our family, because she worked in customer service for 40 years. She knew all of her customers. She knew all about them, their families, their pets, what was important to them, you name it. And by doing that, she knew how to best serve them, because she was always connected to those people who came into her workplace every single day. She always worked a really early shift. So I am sure there were days that she did not want to get out of bed when that alarm sounded at 3 a.m. But she did it. And she did it consistently for 40 years. And so I think seeing that as an example of, you just keep working hard every day and serving people in a way that is meaningful to you, that you can make a big difference for people.
Well, thank you for your time. Let's give it up for our mothers, and of course for Representative Bridget Kelly. You were incredibly informative and inspiring. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Here in a moment, you will see on the screen the contact information for Representative Kelly. So if you have any other questions for her, you can contact her through these mediums. So be sure to do that. Coming up with the League, make sure you join us for the next luncheon, which is on March 8th, if I'm not mistaken. And it's going to be super fun, just as fun as today. So make sure to mark that down on your calendars. And also coming up is State House Day, which is March 3rd, and it has an incredible lineup of guest speakers, including Dr. Michael Lee from the Brennan Center for Justice, Dr. David Niven from the University of Cincinnati, Catherine Terser from Common Cause, Ohio. Make sure to be there. We're going to be talking about dark money, and we're just going to be talking about all the wonderful things about our voting processes, and it's going to be a lot of fun. And if you enjoyed our program today, make sure to join the League, where we can talk about voter enfranchisement, and we make a difference in our communities. So make sure to join us. It is a lot of fun. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. This was lovely.